Gabe Morales here, coming back at you with Gangsters, Cops, and Politicians. And today we have a returning guest who has spoken previously. He is very well versed in the arena of gangs. He knows Chicago gangs, LA gangs, and today he's going to talk about East Coast gangs. Please welcome Mr. Tony Avendorph. How are you today, sir?
Fine, Gabe. How you doing, brother?
Oh, I'm surviving out here, man. In Hawaii, rough life. But we're
I don't
doing
want to hear
okay.
it.
And we're back in the saddle. We were on the mainland for about a year, and now we're back in Hawaii doing our thing. So previously, we have heard you talk about Chicago gangs and LA gangs, and tell us a little bit about East Coast gangs, some of the differences that you have seen out there on the East Coast.
Okay. When I joined the Prince George's County Police Department in 1989, and once I got myself acclimated to work in the streets, there was a drive-by shooting on Southern Avenue, and I was still with my FTO, and we responded, and witnesses said that the shooter threw the gun. Well, having worked numerous drive-bys in Los Angeles, gangsters don't throw the gun. And so I got out of the vehicle and started walking along my curb and found the gun. And I had to explain to folks that this was how gangs do drive-bys. And I started seeing things that I knew people here in the DC area denied. They denied they had gangs. But growing up in the city of Chicago, we knew about DC gangs back in the 60s and 70s. So these gangs kind of formed a foundation in the DC area. And I went to my sergeant and asked him if I could do some research. And he ran it past the chief, and the chief gave me his blessings. And before I knew it, I was on the governor's executive advisory council, updating them on what I was seeing inside of Maryland. Now, they're still denying at this stage. And it wasn't until one of my coworkers and we were on our way back to the station, heard a call about a domestic at a hotel. We were down the street, so we took it. When we knocked on the door, when we walked in, there were about 3 or 4 girls in there, and there was this one dude sitting on the bed, and he was wearing Jerry curls. Well, Jerry curls weren't big in the DC area. And all of a sudden he looked at me and he said, Deputy Avendorph, I had locked this dude up in Los Angeles. He's a Crip. And we had a long talk. Took the girls with us, and he had brought them out from the West Coast to prostitute. And he was telling me about what he saw here in the DC area, about how the Crips and Bloods were trying to ink their way into Maryland and Washington, D.C. and parts of Virginia. Washington, D.C. has a unique set of gangs. They call them crews and they call them mobs. And it's the same thing, gang. And they're all gang fueled, drug fueled, territory fueled. So a lot of these young gang members are doing carjackings, armed robberies. You might have read where a member of the Washington Commanders was shot. They tried to carjack him. They shot him in the leg. They don't care who you are. They will take you out if they have to. In 1995, 96, I met Don Ledane. There was a mutual DC, Prince George's County drug gang case we were working, and Don and I got to talking and everything, and we saw the need to an association. So that was the beginning of Margin, and we had been hearing things from Northern Virginia about a gang called MS-13. Nobody knew about them, but I did. I had worked them over in Lenox, the LA Sheriff's Department, and I knew who they were, what they were about. And that kind of spawned the beginnings of Margin, and which went into Northern Virginia. And then Virginia got their own gang of investigators association. But that's how all of it started. MS-13 is still very, very prevalent here in Maryland and Northern Virginia. They have some cliques in DC, not many. Baltimore has a huge gang problem, a lot of Bloods, a lot of Black Guerrilla family. And what's different about the Black Guerrilla family here is that they're both a prison gang and a street gang. They're very drug oriented on the streets, and they've taken over a lot of drug operations in the city of Baltimore. So we still have gangsters coming down from New York. I had a prostitution case before I retired where Bloods were bringing girls from New York City and New Jersey here. So we had a long list of police departments on I-95 involved in this, and we finally took the whole operation down. So gangs are different here. Rap, it isn't as prevalent. It's prevalent, but it's not as gang oriented as it is in other parts. In Atlanta, Atlanta's off the charts right now, gang activity. So it's gone south on I-95 towards Atlanta, Charlotte, huge gang issues. Columbia, South Carolina's got gang issues. New Orleans, Louisiana, we won't even talk about that. They're out of control.
And you and I
Uh,
also, we went down to Alabama and talked together where they were just
right,
first dealing with some of the gang issues there.
right, and Tuscaloosa was just starting to get gang issues. In fact, it was more Sureños. Remember, I think I took you and showed you that garbage dumpster right behind the venue that we were doing the conference or the training on. And
Yeah.
so, yeah,
Yeah, we'll show some pictures right here.
they've experienced a lot of it, and I still get phone calls, regarding gang activity.
Sounds like to me that there is some similarities to LA and Chicago, but they're also unique. You had mentioned the Black Guerrilla family in Baltimore. Now, I understand that a lot of those guys then go to the Maryland DOC or Maryland or Baltimore City Jail. But for the DC crews, because it's a federal government area, those guys go straight to the Bureau of Prisons, don't they?
Right. Yeah. DC is a federal jurisdiction. That case I was talking about with Don Ledane, we made sure that our target crossed the Maryland DC line, and he actually got stopped in DC. So we got federal time, you know. So and as you well know, the federal time there's no parole. So a lot of the gangsters try not to get caught in DC. They commit crimes in DC, but then they come over to Maryland, or they go to Montgomery County, Maryland, and stuff like that to try to get out of the district.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if you're aware, Tony, if I told you or not, I can't remember, but Don Ledane, when you guys first started marching, he invited me to Washington, D.C., and gang investigators across the nation to have the first time that I'm aware of that there was a Mata Salvatrucha national conference right there in Washington, D.C., and he was on the FBI
Right.
task force. So, yeah, that was
Right.
something. That's when people, as you said, a lot of people in DC were not aware of them. You were, and of course, LA had been dealing with them for a while, but that was very interesting. And I had mentioned a guy that kind of shocked Don, I think, at the time, because I had been with the International Latino Gang Investigators, and everybody kept on mentioning this guy, Nelson Comandari, including our Armada
Yeah.
Salvatrucha in Seattle. He was in the
Right.
phone book, the very top guy
Right.
in the
Right. I
phone
remember
book
Nelson.
of this Mata Salvatrucha gang member who's a shot caller with connections to
Mm-hmm.
LA. So yeah, it's amazing how those connections go national and international sometimes, and then how also the local influence. So thank you very much for sharing that with us, man. That's very, very interesting. Anything else that you'd like to say about the Maryland East Coast area as far as gang significance?
Well, I think it's a pretty well done deal as far as admitting that there is a problem.
So I imagine the politics being probably they're heavy everywhere, as we know, in Chicago, LA, Seattle, but even heavier probably in Washington, D.C., Maryland area, because then now you had the federal government entities
Right.
also at play.
Well,
A lot heavy influence, more influence than they do in other parts of the country.
with guys like Eddie Santana, Edwin has brought a lot of awareness to gang issues on the East Coast. Folks in New York, I did a lot of gang training, believe it or not, in New Hampshire for their police commission, and the New Hampshire prison system, the Massachusetts prison system, all have MS-13 gang members in them. They have a lot of Aryan gangs up that way.
I was just going to say New Hampshire has a big outlaw biker run up there. A lot of
Right,
people are not familiar with, but I remember the Hells Angels getting into it with
right,
the cops there. So yeah,
right,
you are absolutely correct, sir. The East Coast is so diverse. Each
right,
state in each region, even within the
right,
state, Baltimore versus DC,
right,
yeah, your Atlanta versus your Alabama gangs, your Florida gangs.
right,
It's
right,
amazing that they're not that far away, but they're very unique, and although they're connected, they're also very separate as far as the hierarchies and the way they're run.
right,
But it's all the same game, as you said in the beginning. There's still gangs where they call themselves crews, gangs,
right,
sets. Gangster Disciples, Latin Kings, Serenos, Norteños. They're doing the same thing, and you're right, absolutely right. Drugs
Right.
is one of the big motivators for these
Yeah,
gangs.
drugs is the number one motivator, and and with the drugs comes the violence. So,
Right.
the guns. You know, I get photos of takedowns in Mississippi and Alabama. These former students of mine send me photos of what they've done and stuff, and I don't even recognize some of these guns. Some of these guns are something I've never seen. So, it's a huge problem. And I get emails or text messages every day from former students or even people that I didn't never were in my class who others knew of me, and they would ask me questions. So I'm still in the game. I'm not as laid back on the beach like but
Yeah,
yeah,
I hear you. Okay, so we're done, sir. Thank you very much for being on our show, Tony, again. And
care, brother.
okay, thank you.